It's been 3 weeks since 18-year-old Anna Kepner's shocking death aboard the Carnival Horizon cruise ship, and still, no arrests have been made. What started as a family Caribbean vacation turned into a nightmare when her remains were found hidden under the bed in her shared cabin on November 7, 2025, wrapped in a blanket covered with life jackets. The prime suspect, her 16-year-old stepbrother, the only one seen entering and exiting the room on CCTV and keycard logs. We see why he's under scrutiny: no memory of events, hospitalization post-docking, and family complaints about his past behavior. But why no charges yet? Is it FBI diligence, or a cover-up in this blended family turmoil? Stay tuned as we break it down. Doubt. The shifts in the narrative become clear the moment the paternal grandparents' account is released. And instantly, the familiar picture of the night of November 6 and the morning of November 7 aboard the Carnival Horizon becomes far more complicated. Until now, we understood the family to be on a 7-day Caribbean cruise together: Anna's father Christopher, his wife Chantel, the younger children, and the paternal grandparents. The three teenagers, Anna, her biological brother, and her 16-year-old stepbrother, shared a stateroom. Consistent with the blended family structure the family had repeatedly described, no distinction between biological and stepchildren. The morning of November 7 unfolded exactly as the first reports describe it: a ship-wide announcement calling for medical personnel to a specific cabin. The grandparents recognized the room number immediately. At around 11:17 a.m., the housekeeper lifted the mattress and discovered Anna's body concealed underneath the bed, wrapped in a blanket and covered with life jackets. They repeat what both the FBI and the Miami-Dade medical examiner confirmed on November 24. The cause of death was asphyxiation, no evidence of sensitive assault, no controlled substances in her system, and the body was in perfect condition when transferred to the examiner's office. A phrase that will certainly trigger debate, as the full autopsy report is still pending. But the most dramatic divergence from earlier narratives lies in the casino timeline. According to the grandparents, Anna left dinner on November 6 because her braces hurt, went back to the room briefly, then felt better, dressed up, and went down to the casino hours later. They say that was the last time they saw her, the tiny 110-pound high school senior saying, "Mima, I love you guys, I'll see you later." However, previous family accounts and media timelines insisted she never returned after going to her room post-dinner. If the grandparents' version is accurate, the suspect pool narrows sharply. Only those with access to the stateroom after her casino visit could have encountered her, which aligns with CCTV reports showing only the 16-year-old stepbrother entering and exiting the cabin throughout the night. Why was this casino return omitted from earlier narratives? A mistake, a protective omission, or an FBI-driven request to keep details confidential once they seized jurisdiction on November 8? That remains unanswered. Their presence on the cruise also surprises many. They were eyewitnesses from the very beginning. They even had a spare bed in their own cabin. Barbara, the grandmother, is painted as a stabilizing figure in Anna's life amid her father's revolving marriages. But when they speak about the stepbrother, the tone becomes conflicted. On one hand, they describe him as two peas in a pod. With Anna, a good student, a soccer player, quiet, but wrestling with demons from the past. On the hand, they acknowledge he was the only person in the room with her, the only one caught on camera, and that the only possible conclusion is that something happened between the two of them, though they refuse to articulate what that something might be. This stands in direct contrast to the legal stance taken by Chantel, the stepmother, who invoked the Fifth Amendment on November 17 to protect her son from potential criminal exposure. And it collides with prior allegations: Anna's reported complaints about his behavior, and the ex-boyfriend's claim of a 3 a.m. FaceTime 6 months earlier, in which the stepbrother allegedly appeared beside Anna as she slept, panicking when confronted and running off. Emotionally, the grandparents' account reveals something new. Barbara sat in on part of the FBI interview with the teen. She describes him as unable to speak, emotionally shattered, and in disbelief. Previous reports merely stated he was hospitalized for psychiatric observation after the ship docked on November 8, released shortly after, currently living with maternal relatives in Hernando County, and scheduled for counseling on December 1, claiming no memory of the incident. Their portrait of Anna remains consistent with everything released publicly: a straight-A senior, cheerleader, dreaming of the University of Georgia and the Navy, outgoing, reliable, deeply loved, a girl with a clear future that ended senselessly. The timing of this interview, November 25, more than 2 weeks after her death and just 1 day after the homicide ruling, raises its own questions. Why speak now? They had remained silent since November 8 when the FBI took over. Court filings on November 17 established a potential juvenile suspect, yet the grandparents waited until after the official asphyxiation ruling. Is this an attempt to balance the narrative in light of rising suspicion around the stepbrother, or a response to deepening tension within the blended family, especially since Christopher married Chantel in December 2024 and household problems reportedly escalated afterward? In their words, they simultaneously acknowledge the teen was the only person entering and exiting the room, the cameras corroborate this, and logic points to him being involved in whatever happened. But they also stop short of accusing him, opting instead for phrases like, "We don't know what happened," and "let the law decide." A stance that suggests they believe responsibility lies within that room but refuse to be the ones to state it outright. The rifts become clearer when contrasted with Chantel's protective legal moves. The stepmother is shielding her son aggressively, while the grandparents appear to be presenting facts, but delicately, as if walking a tightrope between truth and family unity. The teen now staying with maternal relatives signals the family is splintering into defensive camps. Past incidents. Anna's alleged discomfort around him, the ex-boyfriend's FaceTime account, their shared sleeping arrangements both at home and on the ship, reinforced that the blended family dynamic was strained long before the cruise. All these elements, conflicting timelines, fractured family accounts, and the FBI's silence, create a vacuum the public is desperately trying to fill. Until the full autopsy and toxicology are released, and until the FBI completes its investigation, the central question remains unchanged. Who was the last person in that cabin with Anna Kepner? And what truly happened in the hours the cameras didn't see? What continues to haunt this investigation is the emptiness where evidence should be. Weeks have passed since the discovery of Anna Kepner's remains aboard the Carnival Horizon, yet the flow of concrete information remains disturbingly scarce. And in every homicide investigation, silence around physical evidence raises a critical question. What exactly is the investigative foundation, and who emerges as the logical suspect? We begin with the most jarring detail uncovered on November 7 at approximately 11:17 a.m., when a housekeeper lifted the mattress in cabin D and found Anna's body hidden beneath the bed, wrapped tightly in a blanket, buried under multiple life jackets. But what stood out instantly, and what investigators could not ignore, was that Anna's remains were discovered without clothing, in a confined cruise cabin shared by Anna, her biological brother, and her 16-year-old stepbrother. The absence of clothing is not a footnote. It is a forensic statement. Her being undressed suggests a limited menu of scenarios. Either she was showing, caught off guard in the most vulnerable state a person can be in, or disrobed post-mortem. A deliberate act with intention, staging, concealment, or eradication of evidence. If the attack occurred in the shower, water could have washed away skin cells, contact traces, or fluids. An event that would drastically weaken the forensic field before investigators even arrived. And consider the method of death: mechanical asphyxia, consistent with a bar, hold, and arm pressed across the neck, leaving bruising but no sexual assault and no controlled substances detected. The lack of impairment suggests Anna was conscious, aware, and likely resisting. But a shower ambush changes that dynamic. A confined steam-filled stall, limited room, limited leverage, and an attacker who knows the layout and her routines. The next investigative fault line concerns the removal of her clothes itself. Did Anna remove them voluntarily for a shower? Or did someone else remove them? No sensitive assault was found. But disrobing can also be used to mislead an investigation or remove contaminated garments. If her clothing contains stretch marks, tears, or fiber transfers, it will reveal whether force was used. And the killer, whoever they are, would have had intimate, prolonged contact with her body to apply a bar, hold chokehold, remove garments, wrap the remains, and conceal them. This is not the work of someone panicking blindly. It is the work of someone who had opportunity, proximity, and uninterrupted access. And that narrows the field to the occupants of one room. In the hours prior, Anna was last seen alive at the casino, where she told her family, "I love you guys, I'll see you later." She returned to the cabin she shared with 2 teenage boys. Those 2 facts alone build a prosecutorial timeline. Who was inside the cabin after she returned? Who had the physical ability to subdue her? Who had uninterrupted time? From here, the evidence sharpens into a knife point. Investigators are now scrutinizing DNA on the life jackets, the items used to cover Anna's body after she was wrapped. Routine touch, DNA from shared cabin use is plausible on furniture, door handles, or railings. But on the life jacket specifically used to hide her body, that is no longer routine contact. That is direct involvement. If the killer exerted force, sweating, pulling, lifting, dragging, then touch, DNA, hair fragments, or skin cells could be embedded in those items. And because only one person was recorded entering and exiting that cabin overnight, the presence of their DNA on the concealment items becomes forensic gravity. Hard to dispute. Harder to explain away. The fingernail question stands as another prosecutorial pillar. Anna had long, sharp nails, clearly visible in multiple photos. In a violent neck compression scenario, those nails become weapons of resistance. If she clawed at her attacker, evidence would exist in two places: under her nails, blood, skin cells; on the attacker's arms, half-moon lacerations and scratches. Camera footage shows only one teen leaving and entering the cabin. His hospitalization after docking on November 8, without public explanation, now becomes more ominous. A psychiatric hold can mask both emotional shock and physical injury. The grandparents told investigators he was emotional mess, unable to speak. What they did not explain was whether he was evaluated physically for scratch marks or bruising consistent with a struggle. Meanwhile, past complaints about his unsettling behavior toward Anna, including the ex-boyfriend's account of a 3 a.m. FaceTime incident where the boy appeared over her sleeping body and fled when confronted, now become relevant not as accusations, but as behavioral pattern indicators: access, boundary violations, and opportunity. Then come the keycard logs, one of the most decisive pieces of forensic architecture on a cruise ship. These cards track every cabin entry with a timestamp. There is no guesswork. No memory lapses. No, I think I was inside. Or, I don't remember leaving. If no card besides the boys were used after Anna returned from the casino, the door did not open for anyone else. The killer was already inside. The suspect pool collapses from dozens to one room. And within that room, to the only individual documented entering and exiting. Finally, we turn to CCTV, the silent witness. Cruise ships do not film inside cabins or bathrooms, but every hallway, elevator, stairwell, and casino is monitored. CCTV will show Anna leaving dinner unwell and returning dressed up, her casino visit, her last recorded movements, every person approaching cabin Dazzo, every departure. Combined with keycard logs, CCTV locks the timeline into place like iron teeth. And what remains at the center of this locked timeline? A teenage boy who was in the room with her, was filmed entering and exiting alone, was hospitalized immediately after docking, claims total memory loss, has prior behavioral red flags, and now faces scrutiny over potential DNA on the items used to hide her body. Meanwhile, the FBI remains silent, the autopsy and toxicology remain sealed. And a family divided. Paternal vis. Step-maternal. Circles around a single unresolved truth. This case isn't a mystery of who had access. It's a question of who had exclusivity. And in homicide, exclusivity is often the loudest evidence of all. Did the police went wrong? From the start, what stands out in the Anna Kepner homicide is not the evidence we've seen but the evidence we still haven't. Weeks have passed, and yet the investigative landscape remains unnervingly quiet, almost hollow. When silence fills the gaps in a murder case, it is rarely accidental. It usually means the evidence that does exist is sensitive, volatile, or directing investigators toward a very narrow circle of suspicion. That silence becomes even louder when we turn to the most jarring fact of all. When Anna's body was discovered under a cruise ship bed, on the morning of November 7, she was undressed. In the confined, shared cabin of 3 teenagers, the absence of clothing is not an incidental detail. It is a forensic signature that forces investigators to rewind her final moments frame by frame. Was she showering or preparing for bed, caught off guard in the most vulnerable state a person can be in? Or did someone else remove her clothing, either during or after the assault, to erase evidence or stage a misleading narrative? If she had been bathing, water may have washed away touch DNA, skin cells, or fluids, complicating the forensic landscape before investigators even arrived. And when you pair this with the confirmed cause of death, mechanical asphyxia, consistent with a bar hold pressed across the neck, the implications grow darker. A bar hold requires force, proximity, and deliberate pressure. That is not an accident, it is an act. One committed by someone with uninterrupted access to the victim in a room small enough to silence any struggle. The clothing question lingers because it matters. If Anna removed her own clothes, the removal would be clean and logical. If someone else did it, there would be clues: tears, stretched fabric, fiber transfers, sweat, contact DNA. The killer's hands would have been all over her body to apply the neck hold. Remove garments, wrap her in a blanket, and push her beneath the bed. Those actions leave traces. And the garments themselves, wherever they were placed, could tell investigators whether the disrobing was voluntary, staged, or part of a cover-up. The public has been told nothing about the location or condition of her clothing, which is telling in itself. Evidence withheld is evidence that matters. But the life jackets, the ones stacked over her body, may turn out to be the most incriminating objects in the entire cabin. If the killer exerted the strength required to lift and conceal her, touch DNA would be left behind, skin cells, sweat, hair fragments. And since only one teenager was seen entering and exiting that cabin during the relevant window, DNA on those life jackets would be almost impossible to explain away as routine. It would be direct evidence of post-mortem manipulation. It would also rule out the 14-year-old biological brother who shared the room, leaving investigators with a singular path. Anna's long fingernails offer another silent testimony. Long nails are natural weapons. They scratch attackers, break under pressure, and trap skin cells beneath them, if she fought back. And nothing in her profile suggests she would surrender without a struggle. There could be DNA under her nails or damage to them indicating resistance. And if her nails broke, someone would bear the scars. Half-moon scratches, crescent marks on the forearms, scrapes. Classic defensive wounds seen in chokehold cases. The stepbrother's sudden catalyzation after the ship docked on November 8 raises critical questions. No official explanation has been provided. Was he emotionally overwhelmed? Or were there physical injuries that needed quiet documentation away from the public eye? A psychiatric hole hide a great deal shock, trauma, fear, and wounds. This brings us to the keycard logs, perhaps the most damning silent witness of all. Cruise cabins operate like hotel rooms. Every entry is time-stamped. Every exit recorded. If no keycard besides the boys accessed the cabin after Anna told her grandparents, "I love you guys, I'll see you later," then no stranger came inside. No outsider knocked. No crew member slipped in unnoticed. The killer was already there. Surveillance footage reinforces this, showing only one teenager coming and going from the cabin while the ship moved steadily through international waters. CCTV won't show the crime itself. Cruise ships don't record inside bedrooms or bathrooms. But hallway cameras capture everything else. Who approached the cabin door, who lingered, who left in the hours around the murder. The real footage is locked in the FBI's possession. None of the viral clips circulating online are authentic. They are fabrications created to fill the vacuum that federal silence has left behind. And that is precisely why the FBI refuses to release real footage. Once evidence becomes public, it becomes contaminated by speculation, edits, assumptions, and false certainty. When you stack the details together, the unclothed remains, the concealed body, the potential DNA on life jackets, the long fingernails that may have recorded the struggle, the hospitalization, the keycard logs, the surveillance records showing only one person moving in and out. The forensic narrative tightens like a noose. Not toward a stranger, not toward a crew member, not toward a mysterious unknown attacker climbing aboard in the night. It narrows toward the only individual who had exclusive access, proximity, opportunity, and documented movement in the crucial hours when Anna's life was taken. This investigation isn't stalled. It's focused. And the circle around the killer is shrinking. The chilling last moment. What makes the Anna Kepner homicide echo so loudly across the true crime landscape right now is not only its brutality or the chilling way her remains were hidden under a cruise ship bed, but the uncomfortable familiarity of its structure. A sealed space, a missing timeline, a victim discovered within the very environment meant to protect her, and an alleged perpetrator who statistically could not have come from anywhere outside the confined zone. It is this repeating motif that drags the public back to one of the most analyzed, dissected, and polarizing American murder cases in history, the 1996 killing of John Bennett Ramsey. Whether Anna's case will collapse into the same 29-year limbo is unclear, but the parallels between the two, and the investigative gaps that doomed John Bennett, now cast a long shadow over what is unfolding aboard the Carnival Horizon. In the Ramsey case, everything happened inside the Boulder family home on December 26, 1996. There was no broken window that made sense, no doors left ajar by a stranger, no forced entry that aligned with the ransom note claiming a kidnapping. The house was locked from within. And the ransom letter, 3 pages long, written with a disturbingly intimate knowledge of the family's finances, even demanding the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. All but screamed that the writer was not an outsider slipping in and out under cover of darkness. Even the handwriting analysis, though never conclusive, leaned towards someone familiar with the household's cadence, someone who had time to sit and craft the note without fear of the parents waking up. And when John Ramsey found his daughter's body in the basement hours later, lying there inside their own home, while police searched upstairs for a kidnapper who never existed, it cemented the case as a metaphor for the dangers of relying on family statements instead of forensic architecture. The crime scene was trampled by friends, clergy, and relatives. The body was moved, evidence contaminated. It was the perfect storm of investigative failure, and by the time technology caught up years later, DNA was too degraded, too mixed, too unreliable to anchor formal charges. Now we look at Anna Kepner, 18 years old, a cheerleader, a straight-A student, found murdered on November 7, 2025, in a cruise cabin that functioned almost as a maritime version of the Ramsey residence, a locked room, a finite set of individuals, and no sign whatsoever of an external intruder. Unlike Ramsey though, this time the room is 9 to 10 square meters, a space so small that every sound, every movement, every breath is shared. There were only 3 occupants: Anna, her 14-year-old brother, and her 16-year-old stepbrother. No one else. The cabin's electronic keycard system logged every entry and exit. And according to family members, surveillance footage shows the stepbrother as the only one seen going in and out during the critical timeline. The grandparents later revealed that Anna returned to the casino, dressed and energetic, before saying, "Mima, I love you guys, I'll see you later," and heading back to that same cabin, never to emerge again. Her remains were found under the bed the next morning, wrapped in a blanket and covered in life jackets. She had been undressed, a fact that splits the investigative narrative in the same way John Bennett's staging did. In John Bennett's case, the staging came in the form of the ransom note and positioning of the body in the windowless basement. Here, staging appears in concealment: the blanket, the jackets, the forced hiding. Someone inside that room panicked. Someone made the calculated decision to bury a body in the very place they slept, a sign of an impulsive act rather than premeditated murder. And this is where the locked room motif becomes unavoidable. In both cases, the killer did not need to break in. They were already there. The absence of any external access, no card swipes, no hallway approach captured on CCTV, no footsteps, no shadow crossing the cabin door, positions the Kepner homicide squarely within the family circle. The same conclusion many reached in John Bennett's case, but where the Ramsey investigation collapsed from analog deficiencies. No CCTV, no tracking, no digital logs. Anna's case is fortified by 2025 technology. Every hallway is recorded. Every cabin door action is logged. Every passenger movement in public areas is traceable. That is the difference between a 29-year unsolved homicide and a case that, if not mishandled, could soon yield a precise suspect. Yet the similarities persist in deeper, more troubling ways. Both cases reveal shifting family narratives. In Ramsey, statements conflicted: who found the note, who woke first, who checked the basement, who moved what. Here, Anna's timeline also split. Early claims from some family members insisted she never left the cabin after feeling unwell from her braces. Later, grandparents contradicted entirely, presenting a new version: Anna got dressed, returned to the casino, interacted with them, and left happily. That inconsistency alone widens the investigative gap, mirroring the Ramsey case where mismatched accounts became the first sign that not all truth was on the table. Another parallel emerges in the form of selective memory. Burke Ramsey repeatedly insisted he didn't remember noises from the night his sister died. Similarly, the 16-year-old stepbrother in Anna's case now asserts he has no memory of what happened in the cabin after she returned. Memory loss is a classic line in close proximity homicides. Neither confession nor denial, a limbo that buys time and avoids perjury. And just like Burke, whose behavior during interviews was scrutinized, smiling oddly, scratching his face, the stepbrother's reaction has also raised eyebrows. The grandparents described him as an emotional mess, breaking down during the FBI interview. His sudden psychiatric hospitalization after docking on November 8, held under observation and then released, but absent from Anna's funeral, mirrors behaviors seen in family perpetrated cases where avoidance, withdrawal, or psychological collapse often follow the act. In the Ramsey home, The remains were in the basement, in the Kepner cabin, under the bed. Both cases involved hiding the victim within the shared living space instead of disposing the body elsewhere. That impulsive concealment signals panic, immaturity, and lack of planning, traits typical of juvenile or adolescent offenders, not adult intruders. In Ramsey, the body remained inside because the killer lived inside. In Anna's case, under-bed concealment in the cabin strongly implies the same. More common motifs appear when we examine the role of family silence. In Ramsey, the kidnapping story initially derailed the investigation. In Anna's case, the silence came in the form of no one reporting her missing overnight. The boys in the cabin did not alert staff, did not call family, and did not question her absence until housekeeping exposed the truth. This silence mirrors the Ramsey household's failure to notice John Bennett's absence for hours, even while claiming intruders had taken her. Yet the differences between the two cases are just as telling, and they tilt the Kepner case toward eventual closure rather than indefinite speculation. John Bennett's home had no surveillance. Anna's cabin sits on a ship covered in cameras. The Ramsey house had no digital access logs. The crew's cabin does. The Ramsey investigation failed to secure the scene and contaminated DNA. The Kepner case, by contrast, offers a tiny, controlled space with limited contact points, far easier to map forensic activity within. DNA was a curse in Ramsey. Mixed, trivial, partially degraded, interpreted various ways. But in Anna's cabin, DNA becomes the decisive weapon. Touch DNA on the life jackets, under her nails, on the blanket used to wrap her, on the mattress, under the bed frame. Every contact point becomes a map of behavior. The stepbrother's DNA being found in high pressure areas like the blanket folds or life jacket edges used for concealment would be impossible to explain through innocent presence. Investigators can distinguish between normal, living DNA and DNA resulting from violent force by analyzing pressures, layers, and deposits. If his DNA exists on items used exclusively in post-mortem concealment, it becomes forensic narrative, not background noise. This forensic clarity contrasts sharply with the chaos of Ramsey, where the father carried the child upstairs, ruining the chain of evidence and collapsing key opportunities for DNA interpretation. In Anna's case, there was no family member handling her remains. A housekeeper found her, which locks the forensic record in a way Ramsey never managed. But beyond physical evidence lies motive, and here, too, threads mirror each other. In Ramsey, whispers of family trauma, parental control, and earlier behavioral concerns surrounding Burke swirled without resolution. In Anna's case, the grandparents themselves described the stepbrother as having demons in his past, a phrase prosecutors do not ignore. This suggests earlier psychological wounds, boundary violations, or troubling behaviors that warranted removing him from the home temporarily. For a child to be removed, to protect other children, is a massive flag in the psychological profile of an adolescent suspect. Trauma, unresolved abuse patterns, and unstable blended family dynamics all combine into a volatile emotional ecosystem in which outbursts, sudden escalations, jealousy, and misdirected anger can manifest violently, especially in tight quarters. A 9-10 square meter cabin is a pressure cooker. If that teenager had internalized harmful behaviors modeled by adults, something common in households marked by marriages, divorces, instability, and authority conflicts, Bandura's modeling, trauma reenactment, displacement, and attachment failures all offer scientific explanations for why an adolescent might erupt violently and then attempt to cover up. The setting matters. In a home or a cabin, behaviors replicate what has been observed. The violence may not have been premeditated. It may have been an impulsive reenactment of past patterns, followed by fear, concealment, and denial. The question of access remains the cornerstone of both cases. Ramsey lacked access logs, Anna's cabin does not. This single difference is what prevented the Ramsey case from progressing. In Anna's case, digital records show precisely who opened the cabin door and when. Reports indicate that after Anna returned from the casino, no outsider ever entered the room. The only movements recorded involved the stepbrother. He was the one who came in. He was the one who went out. The 14-year-old brother had no suspicious movements. Anna never exited again. This timeline, backed by digital evidence rather than human recollection, refutes any intruder theory. It confirms the locked room scenario in the strictest forensic sense. What remains now is for investigators to overlay DNA patterns with these logs. Match pressure areas on Anna's neck with fingernail marks on a suspect's arms. Cross-reference timestamps with activity in the hallways. and reconstruct movement within the cabin. Forensic architecture allows them to build a moment-by-moment narrative inside a tiny room, something the Ramsey investigators could only dream of. Just as the failure to track movement in the Ramsey house produced endless theories, the presence of continuous CCTV and keycard logs aboard the Carnival Horizon sharpens the Kepner case into a narrow funnel. With digital proofs, the suspect cannot reshape the timeline. Lies collapse under timestamps, memory loss collapses under access logs. And when the FBI layers DNA from life jackets, blanket folds, mattress edges, and under bed surfaces on top of that digital timeline, the result becomes a closed, circle narrative in which only one person had proximity, opportunity, and behavioral red flags. The Ramsey case became a dead end because the evidence trail was destroyed before it began. The Anna Kepner case, despite all its horror, is its forensic opposite: a sealed cabin, a fixed timeline, uncontaminated evidence, and zero external access. The precedent warns us what happens when a locked room murder collapses into confusion. The present tells us that this time, the walls are closing in, and the truth has nowhere left to run. Yet even with the advances in technology and the precision of modern forensic reconstruction, the Kepner case is haunted by one final resemblance to the Ramsey investigation: the presence of competing family narratives fighting the public's understanding before law enforcement speaks. In the weeks since Anna's death, the public has witnessed shifting accounts: initial suggestions that she went straight to bed after feeling unwell, later corrections that she changed clothes, returned to the casino, interacted warmly with her grandparents, and then disappeared into the cabin. That alone introduces the same instability seen in the Ramsey statements, where different family members offered versions that overlapped in places but contradicted in others. And in both cases, these contradictions are not mere storytelling issues. They hint at deeper layers of hidden fear, protectionism, or fragments of truth seeping through rehearsed accounts. In 1996, those inconsistencies derailed the Ramsey investigation. Police lacked leverage, digital verification, and consistent cooperation. Here, the FBI holds a much stronger hand. They possess keycard logs, digital footprints, CCTV timestamps, and behavioral markers extracted from device histories. They know precisely when Anna walked down the hallway, when she re-entered the cabin, and when the door closed for the last time with her alive inside. Those facts are not subject to memory, interpretation, or emotional dispoints. They are fixed points, digital anchors, around which all human statements must now be measured. And it is in that measurement that inconsistencies become not nuisances, but evidence. The stepbrother's hospitalization remains one of the most underrated signals in this case. After docking in Miami, he was immediately placed under psychiatric observation, a move that serves two purposes in a federal homicide: protection of the juvenile suspect and preservation of potential physical evidence. If he bore fresh defensive wounds, scratches from Anna's nails, bruising on the forearms or wrists, those marks needed to be photographed and documented away from the public eye. A psychiatric environment conveniently shields a minor from cameras, reporters, and the natural scrutiny that follows a death of this magnitude. His claim of memory loss becomes even more significant in this light, mirroring well-documented patterns seen in juvenile offenders who shut down cognitively as a defense mechanism. Whether or not the memory lapse is genuine, the grandparents' description of him as an emotional mess with uncontrollable crying is also consistent with post-offense psychological spirals seen in impulsive adolescent homicides, where the offender oscillates between panic, guilt, dissociation, and attempts to fabricate or avoid a timeline. This is where Anna's long fingernails take center stage once again. Unlike in the Ramsey case, where degraded DNA failed to definitively point toward a family member, Anna's nails likely preserve a clean chain of biological evidence. If even a single flake of skin from the attacker sits beneath them, it forms a molecular link more damning than any confession. Likewise, if the stepbrother sustained crescent-shaped scratches across his arms, a textbook indicator of a defensive struggle in a chokehold, the pattern alone could map out Anna's fight for her life. Investigators know this, which is why their silence signals not absence of evidence but consolidation of it. And that brings us to the final parallel and key divergence. In the Ramsey case, the ransom note was the decoy, the smokescreen crafted to redirect investigators outward when the truth lay inside. In Anna's case, concealment under the bed becomes the functional equivalent of that ransom note, a frantic attempt at misdirection, an impulsive act of hiding rather than fleeing. But unlike Ramsey, Anna's killer could not leave the house, because the house was a tiny cabin on the open ocean. No escape, no second exit, no chance to involve outsiders or plant false leads. Just a room where 3 teenagers slept and only 2 woke up alive. This difference alone, the absence of escape routes and the presence of airtight digital tracking, is why the Kepner investigation will not drift for decades. In a locked room with only one person documented entering and exiting, the dead-end precedent doesn't protect the guilty here. It corners them. Conflict, family. The central fracture line in this investigation begins with the subject's own words. During his initial FBI interview on November 8, 2025, conducted first aboard the docked Carnival Horizon and later inside the Miami field office, the last individual documented inside cabin 9471 repeatedly claimed, "I do not remember what happened." That exact phrase, identical in wording, tone, and delivery, was independently confirmed by Anna's grandmother, Barbara Kepner, who sat in during the voluntary session and repeated it verbatim in her own sworn statement. But what he calls no memory, investigators increasingly view as a contradiction bordering on impossibility. FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit profilers and a board-certified forensic psychiatrist observed unmistakable signs of acute emotional overload, rapid breathing agitation, disjointed phrasing, and episodes of dissociation. A polygraph administered with counsel present returned an inconclusive score. Not a pass, not a fail, but the physiological chaos common in high-stress interviews where the subject cannot fully anchor to the truth or to a lie. A forensic psychology memo now in the case file outlines 3 clinically recognized explanations: stress, induced retrograde amnesia, an acute dissociative episode triggered by traumatic exposure or defensive suppression. A phenomenon seen in sudden, high-intensity incidents where the brain walls off memory to avoid confronting responsibility. None of these conditions negate criminal culpability. Each, however, intersects with motive, opportunity, and behavior. Neuropsychological testing and fMRI imaging, authorized by the U.S. Attorney's Office, are underway to determine whether the memory gap is authentic or strategic. What makes his version of events so pivotal is not simply what he claims to forget, but what everyone else remembers. Investigators have gathered repeated accounts from Anna's friends describing conduct by the subject that does not match the passive, confused persona he adopted after November 7. Over months, they recall him climbing onto her while she slept, seeking inappropriate physical closeness, invading her privacy, and monitoring her in ways that raised consistent concern. These incidents do not independently prove criminal intent, but they form a behavioral pattern that is incompatible with the quiet, harmless image presented later to federal agents. Multiple witnesses describe what mental health professionals classify as an unstable attachment, a fixation marked by insecurity, obsession, and intrusive behavior. The contradictions grow sharper with the report that he carried a large knife during the cruise, followed Anna through public spaces, and inserted himself into her FaceTime calls. Actions that starkly contrast with his claim of confusion and distance. The mismatch between his established pre-incident behavior and his post-incident demeanor is now one of the most scrutinized threads of the entire case. His timeline is riddled with gaps, vague descriptions, and shifting answers that collapse under comparison to the ship's digital logs, hallway camera timestamps, and witness testimony. The most significant discrepancy appears between the 14-year-old brother's account and the subject's claimed amnesia. In 6 separate forensic interviews, conducted by child specialist agents and a licensed trauma psychologist, the younger teen consistently dishearing a heated confrontation erupt inside cabin 9471 between 2010 and 22:40, a male voice shouting, "Shut the hell up." The impact of a heavy sofa striking the wall, objects falling, and sustained movement. FBI acoustic engineers later confirmed that such impact noises would carry clearly through the cabin partition. Crime scene technicians subsequently documented a displaced sofa and fresh impact marks, aligning precisely with the brother's statements. Meanwhile, the subject's total memory blackout has no supporting evidence. No intoxication, no head trauma, no medication, no neurological red flag that would justify a full erasure of a 40-minute confrontation. His silence on the most violent window of the night stands in direct tension with the only witness who does remember it. The FBI file also notes the family's tendency to frame Anna and the subject as two peas in a pod, inseparable and harmonious throughout the cruise. Her stepmother stated on November 7 that their interactions appeared entirely positive. Yet the physical evidence, bruising consistent with a bar, hold restraint, the disturbance inside the cabin, the concealed remains, reveals a drastically different reality. BU analysts emphasize that outward harmony does not preclude sudden escalation, particularly in confined spaces where stressors compound rapidly. The family's assurances therefore serve as context, not confirmation. Records subpoenaed from the Florida Department of Children and Families paint an even broader picture of instability. Between 2018 and 2022, investigators documented multiple instances of physical discipline and verbal aggression by the subject's biological father, including one hospital visit for a split lip. These incidents led to 2 dependency investigations and a custody restructuring that placed primary residence with the stepmother. Family court filings from 2023 to 2025 describe the subject as anxious, hypervigilant, prone to anger spikes, and struggling with trauma-related reactivity. A forensic psychologist retained by the court in June 2025 wrote that he demonstrated significant unresolved trauma responses and abhorrence when faced with interpersonal conflict. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has incorporated these findings into its offender profile, identifying an ACE score of at least 5 out of 10, a level correlated with impulse-driven violence during high-stress events. Pre-cruise text messages reviewed under search warrant show mounting distress in the days before boarding, including statements about feeling overwhelmed and unable to sleep. Investigators emphasize that these psychological factors do not establish guilt, but together, they form an evidentiary backdrop against which the physical, digital, and acoustic findings must be interpreted. Forensic psychiatry literature supports the possibility, though not the certainty, that a juvenile offender can experience genuine dissociative amnesia during a violent act, particularly when the victim is a family member and the confrontation arises suddenly. Between 7 and 12% of juvenile homicide are present with these symptoms, according to peer-reviewed studies and FBI homicide archives. Preliminary neurological screening suggests a similar stress pattern in this subject. Full evaluation is pending. But while dissociative states can complicate recollection, they do not erase the physical environment in which the confrontation occurred. They do not override keycard records. They do not silence the brother's testimony. And they do not alter the forensic reality of a sealed cabin that held only 3 people. One of them now dead, one of them asleep, and one of them claiming to remember nothing at all. All persons remain presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the contradictions surrounding the subject's account are no longer mere inconsistencies. They are now the central fault line in the government's reconstruction of Anna Kepner's final hour. Locker room truth. The central fracture line in this investigation begins with the subject's own words. During his initial FBI interview on November 8, 2025, conducted first aboard the docked Carnival Horizon and later inside the Miami field office, the last individual documented inside cabin 9471 repeatedly claimed, "I do not remember what happened." That exact phrase, identical in wording, tone, and delivery, was independently confirmed by Anna's grandmother, Barbara Kepner, who sat in during the voluntary session and repeated it verbatim in her own sworn statement. But what he calls no memory, investigators increasingly view as a contradiction bordering on impossibility. FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit profilers and a board-certified forensic psychiatrist observed unmistakable signs of acute emotional overload, rapid breathing, agitation, disjointed phrasing, and episodes of dissociation. A polygraph administered with counsel present returned an inconclusive score. Not a pass, not a fail, but the physiological chaos common in high-stress interviews where the subject cannot fully anchor to the truth or to a lie. A forensic psychology memo now in the case file outlines 3 clinically recognized explanations: stress, induced retrograde amnesia, an acute dissociative episode triggered by traumatic exposure, or defensive suppression. A phenomenon seen in sudden, high-intensity incidents where the brain walls off memory to avoid confronting responsibility. None of these conditions negate criminal culpability. Each, however, intersects with motive, opportunity, and behavior. Neuropsychological testing and fMRI imaging, authorized by the U.S. Attorney's Office, are underway to determine whether the memory gap is authentic or strategic. What makes his version of events so pivotal is not simply what he claims to forget, but what everyone else remembers. Investigators have gathered repeated accounts from Anna's friends describing conduct by the subject that does not match the passive, confused persona he adopted after November 7. Over months, they recall him climbing onto her while she slept, seeking inappropriate physical closeness, invading her privacy, and monitoring her in ways that raised consistent concern. These incidents do not independently prove criminal intent, but they form a behavioral pattern that is incompatible with the quiet, harmless image presented later to federal agents. Multiple witnesses describe what mental health professionals classify as an unstable attachment, a fixation marked by insecurity, obsession, and intrusive behavior. The contradictions grow sharper with the report that he carried a large knife during the cruise, followed Anna through public spaces, and inserted himself into her FaceTime calls. Actions that starkly contrast with his claim of confusion and distance. The mismatch between his established pre-incident behavior and his post-incident demeanor is now one of the most scrutinized threads of the entire case. His timeline is riddled with gaps, vague descriptions, and shifting answers that collapse under comparison to the ship's digital logs, hallway camera timestamps, and witness testimony. The most significant discrepancy appears between the 14-year-old brother's account and the subject's claimed amnesia. In 6 separate forensic interviews, conducted by child specialist agents and a licensed trauma psychologist, the younger teen consistently dishearing a heated confrontation erupt inside cabin 9471 between 2010 and 2240, a male voice shouting, "Shut the hell up." The impact of a heavy sofa striking the wall, objects falling, and sustained movement. FBI acoustic engineers later confirmed that such impact noises would carry clearly through the cabin partition. Crime scene technicians subsequently documented a displaced sofa and fresh impact marks, aligning precisely with the brother's statements. Meanwhile, the subject's total memory blackout has no supporting evidence. No intoxication, no head trauma, no medication, no neurological red flag that would justify a full erasure of a 40-minute confrontation. His silence on the most violent window of the night stands in direct tension with the only witness who does remember it. The FBI file also notes the family's tendency to frame Anna and the subject as two peas in a pod, inseparable and harmonious throughout the cruise. Her stepmother stated on November 7 that their interactions appeared entirely positive. Yet the physical evidence, bruising consistent with a bar, hold restraint, the disturbance inside the cabin, the concealed remains, reveals a drastically different reality. BU analysts emphasize that outward harmony does not preclude sudden escalation, particularly in confined spaces where stressors compound rapidly. The family's assurances therefore serve as context, not confirmation. Records subpoenaed from the Florida Department of Children and Families paint an even broader picture of instability. Between 2018 and 2022, investigators documented multiple instances of physical discipline and verbal aggression by the subject's biological father, including one hospital visit for a split lip. These incidents led to 2 dependency investigations and a custody restructuring that placed primary residence with the stepmother. Family court filings from 2023 to 2025 describe the subject as anxious, hypervigilant, prone to anger spikes, and struggling with trauma-related reactivity. A forensic psychologist retained by the court in June 2025 wrote that he demonstrated significant unresolved trauma responses and abhorrence when faced with interpersonal conflict. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has incorporated these findings into its offender profile, identifying an ACE score of at least 5 out of 10, a level correlated with impulse-driven violence during high-stress events. Pre-cruise text messages reviewed under search warrant show mounting distress in the days before boarding, including statements about feeling overwhelmed and unable to sleep. Investigators emphasize that these psychological factors do not establish guilt, but together, they form an evidentiary backdrop against which the physical, digital, and acoustic findings must be interpreted. Forensic psychiatry literature supports the possibility, though not the certainty, that a juvenile offender can experience genuine dissociative amnesia during a violent act, particularly when the victim is a family member and the confrontation arises suddenly. Between 7 and 12% of juvenile homicide are present with these symptoms, according to peer-reviewed studies and FBI homicide archives. Preliminary neurological screening suggests a similar stress pattern in this subject. Full evaluation is pending. But while dissociative states can complicate recollection, They do not erase the physical environment in which the confrontation occurred. They do not override keycard records. They do not silence the brother's testimony. And they do not alter the forensic reality of a sealed cabin that held only 3 people. One of them now dead, one of them asleep, and one of them claiming to remember nothing at all. All persons remain presumed innocent until proven guilty. But the contradictions surrounding the subject's account are no longer mere inconsistencies. They are now the central fault line in the government's reconstruction of Anna Kepner's final hour. In the aftermath of Anna Kepner's death, one lesson rises above all other silence from federal authorities is not hesitation. It is control. Since November 21, 2025, the FBI has maintained a near absolute blackout on operational details, issuing only the most minimal confirmations while the investigation proceeds behind sealed doors. This is not evasiveness. It is standard federal protocol when a juvenile suspect, a homicide ruling, and dual jurisdiction evidence converge. And in a case as volatile as this one, patience is not optional. It is legally necessary. The families, however fractured, are forced to wait in the same darkness. The grandparents openly admit they may never understand every detail of what happened inside cabin 9471. Father Christopher Kepner acknowledges knowing no more than the public. And hither right, the biological mother who learned of her daughter's death through a frantic online search remains locked out of official communication due to statutory next of kin restrictions. In short, every branch of the family stands at the same locked gate. Because the FBI is not done with the evidence on the other side of it. Former FBI agent Steve Moore distilled the agency's position clearly. There is no public threat, no need to rush, and no reason to compromise forensic integrity for the sake of offering updates. Carnival Cruise Line has redirected all inquiries back to federal authorities, reinforcing the same message: the investigation is active. But no one outside federal custody protocols is entitled to know more. Yet within that silence, the government has advanced. The medical examiner's homicide ruling on November 24, mechanical asphyxia, has anchored the case in hard science rather than speculation. Carnival's immediate cooperation allowed evidence response teams to secure the cabin within hours of docking, and the FBI has confirmed that nothing about the crime suggests a broader threat aboard the vessel. The family, trying to rebuild around the truth they don't yet have, honored Anna on November 20 in a service defined not by darkness but by the colors she loved, tributes describing her as sunshine, bright, disciplined, and destined for a Navy career she will never begin. Meanwhile, the juvenile subject remains under psychiatric care, an early intervention that, whatever its motivation, may prevent future harm while forensic and neurological evaluations continue. But buried beneath the tragedy lies the broader lesson the prosecution cannot ignore. This case exposes the dangerous cracks that form when guardians overlook early warning signs. The forensic pattern is textbook. Parents must not ignore behavioral red flags. Aggression copied from adults, dissociation, intrusive behavior toward other children, emotional instability, sleep disruptions, and boundary violations. These are not quirks. They are predictors. And in blended households, those risks escalate. Unrelated male adolescents living in close quarters with younger or vulnerable female siblings present statistically higher incidence of conflict, obsession, and violence, a fact confirmed in decades of child violence data. Too often, families dismiss these behaviors as phases, normal sibling tension, or the byproduct of a difficult divorce. But the research is unmistakable. 5 to 10% of domestic violence reports involve on-sibling harm. 30 to 40% of children experience sibling violence that goes unreported. In blended families, the rate increases, driven by competition, boundary confusion, and inconsistent parental oversight. Ignored warning signs do not fade, they escalate. This case also underscores how digital life has weakened parental visibility into adolescent behavior. The internet creates a false sense of safety. Teens withdraw behind screens, obsessions form quietly, and unhealthy dynamics intensify out of sight. Parents misread silence as stability, and by the time concerning patterns emerge, the harm is already entrenched. The lesson is clear: parents remain the first and most critical line of defense. Systems like the Department of Children and Families can intervene only after damage surfaces. Prevention begins inside the home. Through monitoring, counseling, communication, separation when necessary, and swift action when a child exhibits signs of distress, fixation, or aggression. Every question raised by this tragedy, What would you do if siblings' interactions felt wrong? Should parents supervise more closely in blended families? Does the internet distance us from our children? Could intervention have changed the outcome? Do juvenile protections help or hinder justice? Is not directed at one family alone. They apply to every home where warning signs flicker unnoticed. And as this case continues, those questions will shape the broader conversation just as much as the evidence sealed inside federal files. We close today's analysis recognizing one truth: Anna Kepner deserved a future she never received. Her case remains unresolved, pending toxicology, further forensic correlation, and potential charging decisions regarding the juvenile in that cabin. We will continue monitoring the FBI's progress and bring updates as they emerge. Her story does not end here. And justice, however delayed, will find its mark. But the deepest lesson this case forces upon us is one that every prosecutor, every investigator, and every parent learns the hard way: violence inside a family rarely erupts without warning. It leaks. It whispers. It leaves traces long before it leaves scars. In Anna's case, those traces existed. In behavior, in dynamics, in patterns that should have triggered intervention long before a cruise ship became the setting for a federal homicide investigation. What this tragedy demonstrates is a systemic failure that begins not with the FBI, but with the adults responsible for safeguarding the emotional landscape in which these children were growing. Children do not become violent in a vacuum. They absorb the atmospheres they are raised in. They imitate the models they observe. Trauma does not stay contained, it transfers, replicates, and mutates across generations. And in this case, the documented history of familial instability, custody battles, dependency investigations, psychological evaluations, domestic volatility, formed a powder keg that no one successfully diffused. When parents overlook or normalize aggression, they teach their children that conflict is resolved through dominance rather than communication. When parents dismiss disturbing behaviors as teen face, they ignore the early tremors that often precede catastrophic outcomes. And when blended families share enclosed spaces without full awareness of prior behavioral concerns, they inadvertently create conditions where resentment, fixation, and escalated conflict can flourish unseen. One of the most painful truths emerging from federal studies on intra-familial violence is this: the majority of juvenile offenders who harm siblings or step-siblings exhibit clear warning signs months or years before the lethal incident: withdrawal, boundary violations, sudden attachment or fixation, explosive responses to rejection, nighttime intrusions into siblings' rooms, emotional swings that adults rationalize rather than address. These are not isolated quirks, they are precursors. And in countless cases, including those now cited as part of the Behavioral Analysis Unit's Juvenile Homicide Archive, early intervention could have altered the trajectory. It is also critical to acknowledge the silent accelerant in modern family cases: the internet's erosion of parental awareness. Adolescents today live double lives, one in the home and one online. The second life is often visible to parents until something breaks. Social media teaches them to hide emotions behind curated screens. Algorithmic bubbles amplify obsessions. Digital spaces normalize behaviors, jealousy, surveillance, fixation, that would set off alarms if seen in person. And because these dynamics unfold privately, parents often misinterpret calm for safety. This case shows the cost of that digital blind spot. The online world did not create the instability, but it deepened it, concealed it, and allowed unhealthy attachments to intensify unchecked. The broader criminal justice lesson is equally stark. Family violence rarely announces itself clearly. It hides, it disguises, it waits. And unless parents, schools, and child protection agencies treat early indicators with the gravity they deserve, the system steps in far too late, when the harm is irreversible and the only remedies left are forensic, legal, and punitive. Federal juvenile protections add a second complication. They safeguard rights, as they should, but also slow the investigative process, restrict public transparency, and create the illusion of stagnation when, in reality, investigators are conducting layered, meticulous forensic work. This tension between public demand for clarity and federal duty to confidentiality is not a flaw. It is the price of preserving admissible evidence. But it leaves families like Anna's suspended in grief, waiting for answers that may arrive months later. It leaves biological mothers like Heather Wright fighting for access in a system that prioritizes legal definition over emotional connection. And it leaves the public grasping for meaning in a case where the details cannot yet be disclosed. Still, This tragedy teaches an essential principle, one that courts, parents, and investigators must remember: justice moves slowly, but danger moves fast. And the only effective defense against intra-familial harm is early recognition, early intervention, and early separation when warning signs emerge. Until those lessons reshape how families respond to risk, cases like Anna Kepner's will continue to surface, preventable, predictable, and devastating.